Welcome to the Israel Insider Weekly Podcast, where we talk about the news in Israel with Ron Cantor, president of Shalanu TV and Israel Regional Director for God TV. I'm Lisa Hutchison. Thanks for joining us today. Ron, it is a wonderful time in Israel, I understand. It is yesterday, I believe it was the first day of school, and that is a big deal. It's always a big deal, but it's an extra special big deal, I understand, in Israel. Will you share with us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, in Israel, September 1st is always the first day of school, unless it's on a Shabbat, then it would be September 2nd. But that would be this past Wednesday. We had our first day of school. Kids went back to school for the first time in over a year. I mean, they tried to go back last year, and it was trial and error. And it's difficult. I mean, it really is this virus. And I tend to be one who has come to be convinced that this is going to be with us longer as opposed to shorter. If people go back to the beginning, excuse me, to the beginning of this podcast, when we started doing this, I think in May, June, we were down to 6 cases a day.
Yeah.
And we were all saying, okay, we did it. We defeated coronavirus. People got vaccinated, and the infections are down, almost non-existent in Israel. And they actually, in Israel, we got rid of all mandates. I mean, every mandate. People were freaking out in March and April about the Green Pass, or some called the Green Passport, that it was a Nazi-like, thing. And, this was just part of, the eventual takeover of the whole country and to know where everybody is. By the way, just so you know, the government already does know where you are. If you have a smartphone, you are being tracked. There's nothing you can do about it. Just live with it or get rid of all of technology. So they don't need to put a chip in a vaccine or in a green passport or something like that to know where you are. I've got this little block next to me that you can't see right now. And if the government wants to find me, they can, because of this thing. So maybe we'll create some that don't do that. But the fact is that we live in a digital world. They don't need a chip to know where you are. Having said that, they got rid of the green passport in June. They got rid of the mask mandate in June. It just shows it wasn't, they weren't trying to take over the country through masks and green passports and vaccines. They were trying to keep people from dying, and immediately infections began to go up the minute we took off the mask. And it wasn't just because we took off our mask. It was because of the Delta variant entered, it became prevalent literally at the same time in the middle of June. And so now in Israel, we're back up to 10, 11,000 cases a day of coronavirus. And they're trying to go to school with that. And, I'm listening to different podcasts and I'm reading articles, and, parents are complaining. I tend to just be one that has a little bit more grace and compassion for those who are trying to, imagine being a teacher or a school superintendent or a principal. You've never had to deal with this before.
That's right.
And Israeli parents, more than, our children, are always right in every situation. we always, it's unlike when I was growing up as a kid, the teacher was always right. If there was ever an issue and my parents came in, my parents never said to the teacher, you know what, you're unfair. No, it was always me. Israel is the opposite. Their kids can do nothing wrong. It's always the teacher's fault. And so I'm just trying to have a little bit more grace and compassion it's like me with this podcast. I love doing this podcast. And if ever I'm not prepared or not ready, maybe a listener might judge me and think, yeah, look at that guy. Was he lazy? They don't know my life. They don't know that I'm in a master's program, that I'm doing other videos. I mean, how much I work, and I love what I do. I'm not complaining. I'm not looking for sympathy. But if I'm ever not prepared, it's not because I am lazy. Right. It's because I just couldn't get it all in the time. And so with the teachers trying to get, they don't know what to do for the most. They're trying. So Israeli parents are on the honor system right now regarding coronavirus. That means that you have to test your kid at home with now you have the kits that you can get. I think in America, you can get them for two for $25. You can go home and test yourself every day if you need to. They're not super accurate. So, I mean, it is what it is. I don't know if they're 70%, 80%. I have so many friends who, had corona, got a negative test, or didn't have corona, got a positive test. And I'm not even complaining about that. People are just trying to do what they're trying to do.
Right.
It's so easy to sit at home and rail against the scientists, the doctors, the teachers, the bus driver, everybody. But we've never had to deal with a pandemic before.
Right.
And we're now, 2 years into, or almost 2 years into it.
Yeah.
So the kids, they're back at school, and we'll see what happens if there's a massive, so getting back to, so the parents, they test their kids, and if the kid's positive, they're supposed to leave them at home. Now, what would the temptation is this: you're a parent, you're working, you can't stay at home with the kid, and the kid is not showing any symptoms, but he tests positive. And you're like, is he really positive? And so you send him to school, and next thing you know, there's an outbreak. And that's really what we had in the Israeli youth camp, the Messianic youth camp that we did, the Katsir, where everybody was tested before they came. And one individual, through no fault of their own, somehow either they just weren't showing symptoms yet, or they picked up the virus after they were tested. Or I should say they weren't positive yet, even though the virus was lurking, was around them, on them, in them. And so by the time they get to the camp, they were contagious. And 54 out of 90 students ended up, including counselors. And some of the counselors are, one of my dear friends, in early 70s, got corona, and it was rough. It was really, really rough. So, here we are, Israel still leading the world in trying to deal with coronavirus. And now we're leading the world in, just to get, we'll just segue into giving a little update. Let me just say this first as well, about the first of the year. So in Israel, our new year is Rosh Hashanah, which is coming up. It's also in the Bible, it's called the Feast of Trumpets, Yom Teruah. When we were in Babylon, the Babylonians, their new year started at the same time. So we adopted their months, we adopted their new year. And so it got changed, into a new year. So it is said in some circles that the creation can be traced back to September. That's nonsense. We got it from the Babylonians.
Wow, yeah, that would be quite a calendar. Okay.
Yeah, we need to come clean. We got it from the Babylonians, and I also think Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year. Rosh means head, Shana means year. I think one of the reasons that we don't call it by its biblical name anymore is that the rabbis and the sages they didn't know what it meant.
Right.
So we have this holiday that is called Feast of Trumpets. Okay, and what do? Well, we don't work, and we commemorate it with blowing a trumpet. There's no real,
it's
understanding of what this means, unless you go to the New Covenant. So in the New Covenant, we suddenly find, and we're as you know, Lisa, we just finished writing a book on this called Colliding Kingdoms. You've read it, and there's a lot about trumpets in there.
Right.
And the last trumpet, the final trumpet in Revelation 11:15 leads to the Messiah coming back and the kingdoms of this world becoming the kingdoms of our God. So, and then we see the trumpets in 1 Corinthians 15 that talks about the us instantaneously being changed, getting our glorified bodies, where corruption is changed to incorruptibility. In the twinkling of an eye, we're changed at the last trumpet. And then, of course, the most famous verse, speaking of the harpazo, the rapture, the catching away of the congregation of Jesus, in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, it says there's going to be the trumpet blast. And so if you put all this together, again, the rabbis are not studying the New Covenant, what the New Covenant says about the second coming. But the second coming is constantly, there's trumpets. There's a trumpet in Matthew 24 when it talks about the sign of Messiah being in the sky and him coming back and us being, meeting him in the air. And so there's always this trumpet, and a trumpet announces a coming kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
A king is coming in. So, if you've seen some of the movies of Rome when the emperor or the Caesars, there's that the announcement.
Yeah.
And so, I believe with all my heart that Rosh Hashanah, Yom Teruah, the day of the blasting of trumpets, it's literally would be called the day of blasting,
Mm-hmm.
and and by inference of the shofarot, the shofars, and it's pointing to the coming of Yeshua. It's pointing to the Messiah.
Yeah. And
so
it's
that is happening this month. In fact, in just a few days, we'll be celebrating Rosh Hashanah. In fact, we'll be doing, folks, go to my Facebook page, my public Ron Cantor page. You can also find it Revive Israel. I think we're going to be doing a 2-hour time of prayer and reflection with Asher Intrater, David Demian, and maybe some other folks. That is going to be on the morning of Rosh Hashanah, 8 a.m. in America on the East Coast, 3 p.m. in Israel, and later if you are in the Far East.
Nice.
So that's what happens in the fall. There's there's a changing. September 1st, there's you feel it in your body. There's a change.
Mm-hmm.
And the first rains begin to come in September. Often it's in September that suddenly you're just out doing whatever you do, and it starts raining. Now, for an American, unless you live in a drought area, that's not a big deal. It can rain any day. It rained last night here I'm in Richmond right now. It rained last night, but in Israel, it does not rain. And unless you've been in a country where it doesn't rain for 6 months, you don't know the joy of the rain coming. It reminds me of that passage in Matthew, I think, where the Lord says that God sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. And often preachers will interpret that oppositely, like bad things happen to good people. That's not what it's saying. It's saying good things happen to bad people. Rain is a good thing in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Without rain, you die. Without water, you die in the desert. And so that's what's happening in Israel right now. It's like this morning we woke up here in Richmond and it was cool outside.
Wow.
For Americans, particularly those who live not in, you're in Florida, but for those of us, that don't have nice weather all the time, the beginning of September is, you feel it, suddenly that there's football.
Yeah.
There is the changing of the weather. The air is crisp. Now, we don't get that in Israel. In Israel right now, it's still miserably hot. In fact, it's been one of the hottest summers on record. People are not happy in that regard. We wish the weather would change, but we're gonna have to wait until mid-October, sometimes even early November, for the temperatures to cool down. But that's what's happening in Israel, and kids are back to school, and it could be in 10 more days they'll have to close them all down. We'll see.
We'll see how it goes.
Have you heard of Shalanu TV? It's the only 24/7 Hebrew language gospel channel, and we are reaching tens of thousands of Israelis. Learn more at shalanunow.com. That's shalanunow.com.
Let's go ahead and give the listeners an update on another situation in the Middle East, or I guess a little more toward the Far East, but in Afghanistan. We've shared with them over the last couple of weeks about some ministry efforts. So let's go ahead and give them an update on what's happening there.
Yeah. So this was really quite spontaneous. When I saw what was happening in Afghanistan, my heart was just broken, like everybody's. It was just crushing to see, people being left behind, people trying to get to the airport. They couldn't get to the airport. It was just an absolute mess. One of the worst,
tragedies,
just handled in the worst way possible. So we got a hold of our, friend Robbie Dawkins, who is an evangelist, and he does a lot of work in the Middle East. And I knew that I'd seen some videos that he had done on Afghanistan. He has coworkers in Afghanistan, disciples, people he's trained and raised up. And so we got a hold of Robbie. We did an interview, and really, again, it was just boom, boom, boom. We got our team here at God TV to set up a giving page very quick. In fact, we had already done the interview, and then we had to go back and get the giving page. It was just boom, 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 and then we agreed that we would just whatever comes in is going to go out. We're just going to give it all away to Afghanistan. As you know, in ministry, it costs. There are needs beyond the needs. So you raise money for the needs, but you do have to pay your accountant. You do have to pay your bookkeeping team. There are fees, and if you don't pay those bills, you can't have a ministry.
Right.
But we said in this situation, we're going to ignore all that. Forget the accountant, we're just going to give it all to Afghanistan.
Nice.
And to Robbie's ministry that has been working. He just got back, I think, went over to the stands, as he put it. And they were working to get people out of Afghanistan into other countries over there. And so we are supporting that. They're working primarily with the church, with believers that are in very difficult situation. In fact, I'm getting ready to interview Troy Brewer in about 30 minutes on God TV, and he was telling me just the other day. I don't want to give too many details out. I don't think the Taliban listens to this podcast. They should. It's really good, but he's got a woman in his congregation that called him up weeping, and she tells a story that her brother he didn't even know this woman was from Kabul or Kabul, and Afghanistan, and her brother is still there with his wife and their daughters, are child bride age. They're like 11, 12, 13. And this poor fellow knows that if he's in hiding, if the Taliban finds his family, they're going to kidnap. He'll never see his girls again. They'll be kidnapped. They'll be forced to convert to Islam, and they will become child brides of some of the most disgusting, despicable human beings on earth. They'll be raped. They'll be tortured, and he'll probably be killed. So this is real. This is so real. It's realer than coronavirus or anything else that you might be dealing with in your life. And so we, in a week's time, we raised, I think we're up to $125,000 more, maybe.
Wow. Praise God.
Yeah. So people just responded. Ministries responded. We got one gift from a ministry of $30,000. Another pastor in Orlando gave $5,000. But really, the way those things work, it's not on the $30,000 and the $5,000. It's the $25 and the $50.
That's right.
It's people. They were just touched, and they said, "I got to be a part of helping." I'm a little concerned right now. I'm reading this article. We talked about this earlier. There's 30 Californian children right now that are stuck in Afghanistan still.
That's
and
crazy.
These are kids. These are Afghan kids that have their families got out in the past, and they have American citizenship, and they have family there. And so they were visiting their family. They went over there weeks before the Taliban seized power. And now they can't get out. They got to the airport, they were turned away. And so these are children, and they're obviously terrified. We got to get them out of there. Joe Biden, if you're listening, you got to get them out of. That's why this thing was just done so bad. I've never heard of, and it's so sad to see the administration continue to defend this policy rather than just admit we made a mistake. We should have left our troops in Afghanistan, evacuated everybody, and then removed the troops.
Left. Yep.
It's not rocket science. No. I don't understand it, and we're all just broken over it. Yeah. So there's an update, and we're continuing to stand with the people, pray for the people, and raise money to help get them out.
Yep. What's one of the things that I've just been really impressed by is how many people, like Robbie Dawkins and his team, and then just lots and lots of others, many of them Christians, but some of them not, just individuals who have made a big effort to do what our government has failed to do, to just go and rescue people, do what they can. It's amazing. Like, even like, I think I read yesterday, there's an effort to try to get the girls' soccer team out still. And then there's some other young girls that this American guitar player had has a program, Girls with Guitars, that tries to bring music to them. And anyway, he's like trying to get them out. And so then there was another woman who went and rescued the some girls who were into robotics, and she made an effort. She was in Oklahoma and went to Qatar or Qatar, however you say that nation's name.
It seems like it should be Qatar, but it is Qatar.
Yeah, yeah, I remember. Yeah, President Trump having a moment over all of that. Anyway, so yeah, just where, and I think the thing it translates though into our efforts as individuals and prayer, because there are these things that are very necessary, practical, like getting people on the ground who can help people get out, but also to battle in the heavenlies, because this is a spiritual battle overall. I mean, it's forces of darkness versus the kingdom of God. And so to just encourage everybody to continue to pray, because this is not over. It's not over. There are still people there, and the darkness is encroaching, but to pray. And like I remember from that show that you did with Robbie, the prayer time, I think it was, I could see, I think I mentioned it last week, just see how people, there's still, still Christians in Afghanistan, and they're being scattered throughout the Middle East. Right. And just that would spark a revival, that it would spark the gospel spreading out of all this darkness, that God and his plan is that the gospel is going forth. And so to continue to support them in prayer.
Amen. May it be. May the blood of the martyrs become the seed of the church in Afghanistan.
Amen.
If you're enjoying the Israel Insider podcast, make sure to sign up for the Israel Insider Daily Mail with news from the Holy Land at join.theisraelinsider.com. That's join.theisraelinsider.com.
Well, one last thing in the podcast, I don't think we can really close it out till we talk just a little bit about politics in Israel. We need to cover a couple of things. Maybe just I'll give like a little overview of two things, and then just share whatever from there. But this week, maybe even I think just in the last day, the budget continues to make progress in the Knesset, and that's a key thing for this new government. And then also Defense Minister Benny Gantz met with Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, and that is a big deal as well, right on the heels of Prime Minister Bennett meeting with U.S. President Joe Biden. So that's kind of the lay of the land. Will you share with us, your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah. So the first thing, the budget. I know folks at home are going, "Oh, give me a break. Let me turn this off." Just hang with me for a minute, because the budget is very important. You can't operate a business without a budget. Legally, our ministry has to submit a budget every year. So budgets are very important. And when there's no budget, many of the most important needs don't get met, like welfare needs, people who are really in need and need help. But from a political point of view, if they don't pass the budget, the government automatically collapses and we go to new elections again. And Israelis don't want that. They really don't. Even if they don't like the government, it's just enough with the elections already. Let's have a stable government.
Right.
And they are making a lot of progress in a lot of other areas. But so it did pass its first reading. Well, first, a few weeks ago, it passed the cabinet. But then it had to, then it goes to the Knesset for the full vote. So it passed its first reading. I'm not sure how many more hurdles it needs to pass, but it's doing well. We're talking about it like it's an entity, like it's a breathing this thing, the budget, and it's on its way passage. It's got a passport. It's got to go through this, here, and that. But it needs to be passed. And if it's passed, it's a huge step for this government. We're getting ready to go into 2022, and we have not had a new budget since 2018. So
wow,
we really, whether you're on the left or on the right, we need a budget. So that's number one. I won't talk any more about that. The other thing is, Benny Gantz is our defense minister. He was defense minister under Bibi when they had their joint government that did not last. And he recently met with Mahmoud Abbas. Mahmoud Abbas is I think he's 88 now.
Wow.
If not, he's 89. I mean, he's up there. And he has been the president of the Palestinian Authority ever since Yasser Arafat died. And that goes back to the early 2000s. So
Wow.
he has been in power for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And they have not had an election since 2006. They were going to have one this year, but they canceled it when they began to see how badly they were going to do. And then, of course, with Hamas, staging a war with Israel over 11-day period, even though, if we're just adding up, Israel clearly won the war. And honestly, Israel has so much firepower. It's, that would not even be an issue. They don't think they're going to win a war with Israel. When they fire bombs at Israel, they're not thinking, let's fight a war and we're going to win. They know that's impossible. And we know from, having the weaponry we have that we can't use 1/10 of 1% of the firepower that we have, or we would just obliterate Gaza.
Right.
That's why I always laugh at the accusations of genocide. We're doing the opposite of genocide. We have the ability to stop our enemy, and yet we let them keep firing rockets at us. That's not genocide. Some would call it stupidity. But we also understand that we do have defense systems like the Iron Dome. Right. And so we're able to avoid mass casualties for the most part. God help Hamas if they ever make a direct hit, on a whole family, or a bus, or, there was just a few years ago, a bomb or a rocket hit a bus full of Israeli soldiers, and they had just gotten out of the bus.
Wow.
If they were, again, that's Hamas. They don't want to hit that bus with the soldiers inside. They want the soldiers to have just gotten out because they know that the wrath of Israel would fall upon them. Without that happening, we tolerate it. It's not pleasant for our Southern citizens. They live in trauma. They live in PTSD, sometimes running out of their home when these little wars happen, for 10, 12, the 2014, I think it was 6 weeks, every night, several, times a night, you got to wake up, run to a bomb shelter, sleep in the bomb shelter. You don't even want to go back to bed in your home because you think you're going to be woken up shortly. So, Gantz goes and he meets with Abbas. And of course, there's some in the Israeli government on the far right that are screaming, "Look at this! This is a secret plan to make peace." No, it's not. It is at the end of the day, Palestinians are human beings.
Yeah,
they're not animals. They're not pets. They're not. They're human beings made in the image of God, and most of them are not terrorists. Most of them do not want to be terrorists. They just want to live life.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
Now, the problem is that their leadership is corrupt. Mahmoud Abbas is corrupt. His government is corrupt. So we have two choices. We either work with a corrupt government. Well, we have three choices. We work with a corrupt government in Mahmoud Abbas. We work with Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, or we don't work with anybody. We just do our best to move on. And that's kind of where we've been for many, many years now. There's no one to talk to. We've talked on this podcast before about the disappearance of the Israeli left. And in Israel, left and right has to do with the economy and security. And so there is no more Israeli left. 10% of our seats in the Knesset belong to left-wing parties. There is no left wing anymore. And that's not because Israelis didn't want peace with the Palestinians. I know most of our listeners would never agree to give up land for peace in the Middle East. This is real estate that God gave to the Jewish people. But I can tell you half of Israelis were more than willing to give up land for peace in the 90s. They just wanted peace. The problem is we were willing to give up land, but we weren't getting peace in return. We were getting terrorism. And the more we showed graciousness, it was perceived as weakness, and we would get attacked more and more. In fact, that was illustrated in 2005 when we left Gaza and turned it over to the Palestinians, which turned out to be Hamas. They destroyed all the farms and the greenhouses, everything we left them, and said, hey, this could kind of help your economy. They just destroyed it. We offered to help them learn how to use it, and they didn't want that. And then they started sending, they looked at that as weakness. They saw us leaving Gaza as a weakness and began to bomb us. They didn't say thank you. They bombed us. So, all the left-wing folks out there who just have such a broken heart for, Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, they don't know what's happening. They don't know or refuse not to believe that the Palestinian Authority, they pay the families of suicide bombers a monthly stipend, a salary, so you get rewarded. So when you're, right now their economy is in shambles. So, you might be a father of 6 and you don't have a job and you don't have enough food, and coronavirus has just wrecked the economy. And so you thought, you know what, I'm going to be a suicide bomber. This is a win-win-win for me. I become a hero, even though I'll be dead, but I'm going to go to heaven and be with 72 virgins. And my family is going to get a monthly stipend. I'll have a park named after me, or a square named after me, or a school or playground named after me. My family will enjoy they'll go from being this poor family to, being heroic. So it's an incentive to go out and kill, as many Israelis as you can.
Wow.
So Gantz meets with Abbas to basically say, listen, we don't want you to die. We know your economy is going through a difficult time. We know that you, so just getting back to the suicide bombers and they pay them off, we then subtract that. We say, oh, you're going to give $100 to a suicide bomber? We're subtracting that from what we give you because we collect taxes for them. And so we make sure that they pay for this program that we affectionately call Pay to Slay. And so Gantz meeting with him, actually, I think it was a positive thing. It shows the true nature of Israel, that we are humanitarian and that we're not monsters. We do care about the Palestinians. Yeah. We're not, they live on land that, according to the Bible, belongs to Israel. But when you have foreigners on your land, you have to take care of them. You don't just kill them.
Right.
And so that's what the Torah tells us. So it's a good thing when our government seeks to do things, and we should seek peace with the Palestinians. I don't believe that there should be a Palestinian state on Israeli lands, but we should do what we can to get along with them. And that's hard. It's really hard because they don't want to get along with us.
Yeah, it was interesting. Sorry. It was interesting. Gantz, one of the statements either he said or his office said was just that, recognizing that the Palestinians aren't going anywhere. Israel's not going anywhere. Your neighbors, and that's how it's going to be, tomorrow morning, was basically his philosophy. And I just thought it was, to me, I mean, I'm totally no expert by any means on this or Israeli, politics or anything like that. But I just thought it was another interesting move by this new government to send the defense minister to meet with the president of the Palestinian Authority. Almost, it wasn't a diplomatic mission, but it was a gesture. And, much like Foreign Minister Yair Lapid has been, going everywhere since he got into office, just making friends. And Prime Minister Bennett went to the U.S. and this government just I think it has a very interesting approach to these problems. We'll see, how it all settles out. But, I've read, and we have an article about it, how at this very moment, Hamas, since Sunday, has been stirring up riots, nightly riots on the Gaza border with fire and explosives and things like that. But during the day, Israel is letting, because they control this crossing into Gaza, and they're letting in construction materials by the truckload. And for Gazans to rebuild, and the issue has always been in the past, my understanding is that material is rerouted by Hamas to build the terror tunnels, but the idea is that Israel's trying to help Gaza's economy come back online and people rebuild, and they've expanded the fishing zone, and they're letting more people in to work into Israel, and all these gestures. And the same with the meeting with the boss. So just trying to help the people, like you said, the everyday Gazans and Palestinians that just want to provide for their family.
Right. Well, yeah. And that is a situation where we are, and it's not reported on around the world, but we are actively seeking to help the people in Gaza, help the Palestinians. We care about them. Mm-hmm. And yet every night they're coming in, lighting fires and tires on fires and protesting. And listen, before we go, and we do need to go because I have a filming coming up any second now. I did want to follow up on, I never fully gave us the situation of the coronavirus in Israel right now. So as of today, we are breaking all records in terms of the daily infections and the percentage of those who are tested who are positive. I think it's over 7% of those who get tested are coming up positive. That's a record. But here's the good news, is that the serious patients are rapidly falling. So
that's good.
they were 753 on Sunday, and now here we are later in the week, and it's down to 666. And yes, that is 666. Don't be alarmed, because tomorrow it will be 632, and then the week it's just a number. Every now and then we have to use it. You've all seen it on your odometers. Nothing to panic about. But in all seriousness, what we're seeing is more infections. But because of the high number of people who are vaccinated, they are not serious. People are getting over it quickly, and some with relative ease. And now with the third dose of the vaccine, which is somewhat controversial, but well over 1 million Israelis have taken the third dose. That is what they're crediting with bringing down these serious cases. So Israel was the first country to take the vaccine, going all the way back to, December, January. And so most of the other countries in the West, followed Israel about 2 months after that. So, what they're saying is that the effectiveness, and this is something they said from the beginning, it's not a shock. What we didn't know was what was going to happen was the Delta variant. That kind of, the vaccine was doing its job, and then Delta shows up. And so over the past several weeks now, they have been aggressively giving now anybody in Israel can get the third dose. And that is bringing the serious, that's what they're crediting the falling of the serious cases with. So again, I had this, at this point, I tend to think that we're going to be dealing with coronavirus for years to come, that you don't just jump out of a pandemic, and this thing can continue to mutate. And, my deeper concern is the division in the world, and particularly in the body of believers over this. So that continues to deeply concern me, that, our focus, our calling is to preach the gospel, to make disciples of all nations. And yes, we need to deal with coronavirus, but we also need to remember that we will be known to the world as the disciples of Jesus because of our love for one another. So as you are dealing with coronavirus, pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine, pro-ivermectin, against ivermectin, just remember that that's a subcategory, and that the higher category is to walk in the fruit of the Spirit, and it is to share the gospel. Ask yourself, how can I reach people who are scared right now? Who are wondering, am I going to die from this virus? And what happens when I die? So early on, this is over a year ago, we made not a virus, a film in Hebrew, about how to be vaccinated. We didn't know there was going to be a vaccine, but we assumed eventually, but we were talking about the blood of Yeshua, that's the key. And we made that in Hebrew, and, over I think 17,000 people have seen it. And we're trying to use this opportunity to help people see their need for salvation.
Yeah.
Let me encourage everyone to do the same.
And thank you for all the updates. And if you, our listeners, enjoyed this weekly podcast, please be sure to give it a review wherever you're listening from, and follow us on Facebook. Sign up for a daily email to get the inside scoop on happenings in the Holy Land. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next week.